So for those just entering this webinar, I'm going to wait about 30 seconds, a minute or so to allow others to join, and then we will proceed with introductions and some of the context for today's talk and the seminar more broadly. So hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, evening, or whichever time zone you happen to be in today. My name is Edward Cunningham. I'm director of the Rajawali Foundation Institute for Asia's China programs here at the Ash Center. And I just want to start with a few announcements on behalf of the center. First, we'd like to acknowledge the land on which Harvard sits as the traditional territory of the Massachusetts people and a place that has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. Also, this Zoom is being recorded. This event is being recorded, and that recording will be made available on our Ash Center YouTube channel shortly after the event. Third, you are welcome to submit questions at any point throughout the duration of the event via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and please do so as we move along. I will take a look at those and then pose some to our speaker today. On that last point, we are pleased to welcome Professor Ying Zhu speaking today to all of us about her new book, Hollywood in China, Behind the Scenes of the World's Largest Movie Market. Professor Zhu is the founder and chief editor of the journal Global Storytelling, Journal of Digital and Moving Images, also recipient of fellowships from the National Endowment for the Humanities, from the American Council of Learned Societies, and her writings have appeared in academic journals as well as popular media. She's the author of 4 books, co-editor of 6 books, was previously on the faculty at the City University of New York, now a professor at the Academy of Film at Hong Kong Baptist University, and an adjunct in the School of Arts at Columbia University. So, Professor Zhu, thank you again for joining us, and I will turn it over to you, and my colleague Mark can start sharing the slides when convenient. So thanks again.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Tony, Sash, and Ash Center for inviting me to do a book talk today, and of course, for Edward Cunningham to host the talk. Given that this is a virtual event with no actual book to pick up and flip through, and I thought I should blow up the book jacket for you to at least admire the cover design. So there you go. So, and this might feel like a Washington Reads, which those of you who initiated refers to the DC circuit people who pick up books only to check and see if their names appear in the index. On a weightier note, the book was almost 10 years in the making. And I took my obsessive compulsively sweet time to comb through every single bit of research material, a feast that would have been an impossibility, kind of really impossible to accomplish under the current sausage churning, quantity-driven assessment culture of our academia. And fortunately, I was not under the stress of tenure and promotion, although I did stress out my editor at the New Press, who had to tolerate a prolonged process while pushing back on my endless demand and request of whining to expand the word limit. And at 370 page long, if you do actually get a chance to pick up the book, the final product is much leaner and lighter. And after I grudgingly let go 1/3 of the draft manuscript, enough material for a sequel, perhaps. So I And things do change when you let a decade pass by. If we can go to slide 2. On Weidier, so the idea of writing a book that parallels the origin and evolution of the American and Chinese film industries, while all the while focusing on Sino-Hollywood relation, started at a history conference, actually. I participated at Harvard in March 2013, a time when Dali and Wanda, the company, a film studio founded by the Chinese real estate tycoon Wang Jianling, turned the beleaguered major US theater chain AMC, which she had acquired a year before in May 2012, to profit. And actually, I believe Wang Jianling visited Kennedy School right around the time our Harvard conference, history conference took place, either before or after, I remember. And as a reminder, 2012 was the year President Xi Jinping assumed the power. And in May the following year, Wanda announced that the company would grow its global business, including expanding into the European market. And by September 2013, when Wang Jianling had become China's richest person. The same month, Leonardo DiCaprio walked the red carpet as one of Wang Jianling's guests for honor at Wanda's ceremony announcing a 4.9 billion Qingdao movie studio. And Xiaobong Isaacs, the president of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, was also present at Wanda's ceremony. Wang Jianling predicted at the ceremony that China's film market would become the world's biggest in 5 years. And fast forward to 2020, the COVID pandemic would shut down the global film market. While the American film industry struggled, China managed to reboot its film market during the second half of 2020 while shutting out Hollywood's pictures, making 2020 one of the worst years for Hollywood in China. 2020 was also the year China officially overtook North America as the world's largest film market. And Wang Jianling's production was off by only 2 years. In March 2021, an article from South China Morning Post reported the dwindling appeal of US entertainment programs among the younger generation of Chinese. And by June 2021, Wanda had largely retreated from the film business, having sold most of its shares in AMC amidst the theater chain's steep revenue collapse due to the COVID lockdown, right, in the US. And Wanda simply returned to its home turf. And by fall 2021, thanks to the sabbatical, I was finally able to wrap up the book. And by then, the Chinese American films have grown far apart and become more distinct from each other, even as the two industries have become ever more entangled. The collusion in business had continued, but the government, media, and public scrutiny from both sides made film collaboration a hazardous proposition. Can we go down to the next slide? My book parallels, kind of in a broad stroke, the origins and evolutions of the American, it should be slide 3. Yes, this one, yeah. So my book parallels in a broad stroke the origins and evolutions of the American and Chinese film industries as it traces and tracks the ups and downs of Sino-Hollywood engagement, which have been under the sway of the larger political, economic, and cultural forces, much of these in the name of national interests. To better understand the relationships between cinema and national interest, I begin the book by unpacking the linkage between film industries and national governments. And within the context of Sino-US, it actually took some lobbying effort from the film industries to, for both the Chinese and the US governments to see the potential of motion picture for cultural influence, political persuasion, and also consumer product promotion in the case of the US, but not so much China. And once caught on, both governments sought to capitalize on the affective power of cinema. Film does emerge to be one of the most glamorous and effective influencers, to use the modern lexicon. But the nature of the kind of relationship between the industry and the government differed. The US government, up until when President Donald Trump came along, functioned mostly as a facilitator for the growth and international expansion of the American film industry, as it relished Hollywood's charm in showcasing the American lifestyle, pop culture, and consumer products. And the Chinese governments during the early years, both speaking of the KMT or the CCP, were more meddlesome, prone to counter-regulations, but offered a little financial relief to the Chinese film industry under the shadow of Hollywood, which consistently outperformed Chinese films on China's domestic turf. Hollywood's dominance in China during the Republic era put the beleaguered Nanjing government on defense. As captured in the book, the Chinese reacted passive-aggressively towards Hollywood's popularity and also American films' rampant China offense on the image front, of which Hollywood was guilty as charged, though nothing personal, as the big boy Hollywood was an equal opportunity defender who managed to nonchalantly offend images of many nation states as it crashed their domestic markets. And the People's Republic era would usher in a decidedly more proactive approach in eradicating the US cultural presence. Indeed, banning Hollywood altogether during the Mao era. And my book basically charts 4 major phases in the Sino-Hollywood relation dating back to 1897, the year when the first batch of US motion pictures appeared in China. We'll go to slide 4. So here's the pioneer. So this is the film, the first batch of films were being brought over by James Recalibrating, an American photographer from New Jersey, the birthplace of the American film industry. Recalibrating screened a few Edison films, including Tsar Nicholas' two visit Paris at a tea house in Shanghai. And he continued on as a photographer in China and recorded the Boxer Rebellion of the 1900s. Let's move to the next slide. Now, most of us think about the international film trade in terms of how many domestic films are released each year and what share of total box office receipts go to foreign versus domestic films, etc. However, in the early days, a more common way to keep tabs on the film trade was to simply tally up the total length of exposed film each year. A raw measure to be sure, but one that served well enough in its time. And in one of the books, the American film scholar Carrie Seagrave goes to this early record to compare length, as you can see here. The numbers reveal a footage race that began with entrants from around the world competing on a very leveling playground until World War I intervened. The war hobbled film production nearly everywhere except the United States, allowing Hollywood to take the lead and run with it. In China, Hollywood took up to 80% of the market during the Republic era. Go to the next slide. And the founding of the PRC in 1949 and the outbreak of the Korean War in 1950 led to a wholesale ban on all things American, including Hollywood pictures. We're talking about in China. And though the ban was not without trepidation from the party leaders who actually had private misgivings about an outright ban, was the concern that such might provoke an outcry from the fans of Hollywood pictures, particularly in China's cosmopolitan urban centers such as Shanghai. It was a high time for the party to woo pictures pacifiers. Twist is that, as I uncovered in my Though the official ban on Hollywood would last throughout the Mao era, there were actually quite a number of Hollywood-led Western films circulating unofficially among the party's top echelon under the direct control of Madame Mao, the wife of Chairman Mao. Can we go to the next slide? So these films were called internal reference films, for instance, this one, right? And some of which were lavishly dubbed in Chinese under the auspice of Madame Mao. Madame Mao, she was cast in an early Shanghai film. And who was a one-time movie actress in Shanghai and then also a closeted fan of Hollywood classics. In the early 1970s, there were these semi-hushed overnight marathon screenings of internal reference films at government, including military compounds, as incentives for people to sit through the multi-day marathon party meetings. Right? It really tests your endurance. And so popular were these films, the evening screenings frequently run up to 7 or 8 hours straight. A practice that way predate what we now call, I suppose, binge watch. Let's go back to slide 6, actually. So, and then we see the third phase. The third phase saw the triumphant return of Hollywood in the mid-1990s with overture from China. The return of Hollywood came at a time when China's economic reform forced the previously state-subsidized film industry to earn a commercial living. Far from soft landing, the industry stumbled, failing to make marketable pictures. Movie theaters were shedding patrons to emergent entertainment, competing entertainment options. Hollywood was called back to resuscitate the Chinese film market. Hollywood performed to the task, and China revived the film industry by returning to the good old Hollywood playbook, Hollywood model. And finally, the current phase, China's recent surge as the world's largest market and China's takeover of its own domestic market. Now, one point I emphasize in my book is that Hollywood films have triggered simultaneously fascination, apprehension, resistance, and competition during both China's Republic era and the post-Mao People's Republic era. Admiration for the sheer allure and market prowess of Hollywood pictures, resistance for Hollywood's perceived historical injustice to the Chinese image and to Hollywood's market dominance, and of course, more recently, competition, an effort to draft Hollywood into serving China's interests, particularly China's global image campaign, notwithstanding, of course, the new chatter about decoupling. And my book captures the kind of parallels between Chinese and American film industries at various stages of development. Both industries had their roots in commercial operations, though the American film pioneers were mostly tied to the distribution exhibition business, while the Chinese pioneers were a mixture of theater, cinema lovers, and also merchants. Early film industry in China pretty much emulates the American style studio system. Even the censorship regiment progressed in a similar fashion in China and the US. In fact, during the Republic era, the Chinese consulted the Hays Code in devising its own censorship regulations. The past diverged only during the Mao era, as the People's Republic of China forcefully converted the Chinese film industry from a private, decentralized model to a Soviet-style centralized and state-subsidized model, while banishing Hollywood from China altogether. And the post-Mao era saw yet a reversal of the Soviet model, and the film industry was forced to reconnect with the market, which took some laborious effort, including inviting Hollywood back to China and getting reacquainted with the Hollywood trade. The return of Hollywood triggered the same euphoria mixed with fear and loathing. As the China film industry grows stronger, China pushed back, using a number of restrictive measures to reduce Hollywood's China presence. Let's go to slide 8. Yes, good. As cited in the Hollywood Reporter, American-made films accounted for more than 48% of China's box office revenue a decade ago. The number was down to 36% in 2016. By the time COVID came along in 2021, which quickly decimated American film business, Hollywood films plummeted to only 12.3% of China's box office revenue. The rebound of Chinese film market was largely inaccessible to Hollywood pictures. Hollywood's post-Mao honeymoon seems to have come to an end. Let's go to slide 9. There have been signs that Hollywood is pivoting away from films containing China elements, including casting talents of Chinese heritage or featuring Chinese director, right? And particularly after the failure of these films in securing China releases, none of these films, did well in China or had a China release yet. But can Hollywood afford to simply walk away from the Chinese market? Right? That's the question people kept on asking. Here's an interesting case: the release of the Tom Cruise franchise Top Gun 2, the past summer, is an interesting case to watch for Hollywood without the Chinese market and funding. Let's go down to the next slide. The film was actually initially co-financed by the Chinese internet company Tencent. A trailer in 2019 saw our hero Maverick wearing a bomber jacket with a patch that was missing the image of the ROC flag as seen in the first film, which caused a stir, right? And Paramount Pictures was called out for pandering to China. However, the ROC flag was restored in the film as a final version, which was released in 2020, just 2022, over the summer. So what happened between 2019 and 2022? Well, amidst the deteriorating Sino-US relation, Tencent withdrew its funding by the late 2019, right? And Paramount has since come to terms with the impossibility of getting a China green light for a film showcasing the US military might. With the pressure of the China market gone, the studio promptly restored ROC flag. The film had its wide release globally, excluding China, grossing $1 billion in box office and counting, and to become the highest grossing film of 2022. The case of Top Gun 2 suggests that Hollywood can survive without the Chinese market if it recalibrates its blockbuster budget and box office expectations and make do with a final tally without the China revenue. In fact, owing to the fabulous domestic performance of Top Gun Maverick, and also there's another one, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. I've never seen this movie, by the way. So, but both of which were denied a China release, and North America is actually poised to be on track to reclaim the world's biggest theatrical movie market in 2022. So some in the United States foresee a return to a business model where the US studios make mid-budget movies targeting at American adults rather than mega budget films aiming to please foreign markets. Let's go to the next slides. As Sony Bunch puts it, a world in which Chinese filmmakers make films for Chinese audiences, in which American filmmakers make films for Western audiences, isn't the worst thing that could happen. Sony Bunch might have a point. I, for one, am rather jaded by Hollywood's theme park-like superhero franchising movies, kind of seen as the winning formula or the only winning formula for the global market. And I have Martin Scorsese by my side. Let's move to the next slide, see what Martin Scorsese says. So as you can see, this is the piece Martin Scorsese did on the New York Times, right? So he was pretty much fed up. And he called the superhero movies as theme parks, right? So maybe the decoupling will help to ring in the Marvels and the like. Maybe the loss of the Chinese market will allow the studios to tone down budget and make a few more A-class films of genuine domestic relevance and human emotional touch. And in China, apart from blockbuster Hollywood films, the Chinese filmmakers have been making mainstream commercial films for Chinese audiences that are enormously popular in China. To better check the pulse of Chinese cinema, or of China for that matter, it behooves us to pay more attention to the popular Chinese mainstream films. Over the years, the Chinese film industry has cultivated a unique brand of Hollywood holiday movies, for instance, that have resonated with the Chinese audiences. And chapter 7 of my book captures some of these films. Let's move to the next slide. So here's, what do China watch? What do the Chinese watch? So these are, a few of them that I discussed in my book. And from the standpoint of business and geopolitics, it does not hurt for Hollywood to better understand what makes the Chinese audiences tick. Governments, US and Chinese, tend to underestimate the intelligence of their audiences. Audiences gravitate towards films of personal connection, not necessarily films promoted by the governments or the studios. To wrap up gradually, initiated almost a decade ago, my book started out by invoking somewhat facetiously the term courtship to describe what I saw as a fitful relationship that, however tentative and antagonistic at times, had brought two willing partners to the negotiating table in their common pursuit of prosperity and happiness, measured by the tangible box office receipts and by the less tangible notion, of cultural influence. Writing from the perspective of studio history, my focus is on the machinations behind the art and artifice of film, including economy and politics of filmmaking. The Sino-Hollywood relation was initially more of an, apprenticeship, as the two parties were by no means equal in finance, technology, and popular appeal. While guilty of flooding the global market with its brand, of entertainment at the expense of local culture industries, Hollywood has always paddled, softly, with plenty of charm and delight, winning the hearts and minds of Chinese audiences. Hollywood's global mega stars in the likes of Tom Cruise can make even the parochial American patriotism look cool, cosmopolitan, and even universal. On the other hand, the business of filmmaking is indeed booming in China, but not necessarily the cross-cultural appeal and global recognition of state-sponsored films. Let's move to the next slide. When it comes to the race of rival propaganda war films, Top Gun, Maverick has earned $760 million outside of North America without a China release. But its counterpart, the Chinese domestic blockbuster Battle at Lake Changqing 2, has brought in less than 1 million from beyond China's borders. Numbers do not lie. Though it continues to lag in global popularity and recognition, China's domestic market sees no signs of shrinking. Revenues during this past summer saw a 22%, roughly 23% increase over the same period last year. The robust domestic market further empowered the Chinese film industry, which now wants to be a competitor to Hollywood, at least in the global south and along the One Belt, One Road corridor. But I'm not forecasting the end of Hollywood in China. China has both the market to sell and the cash to invest. It would be hard for deal makers to simply walk away. And despite scrutinies from the lawmakers and the media, from both sides, deals will be made, but more surreptitiously in a much more low-key fashion. Just this past, in August, James Cameron treated the executive from China Film Group to a screening of footage of his new Avatar project, which was in progress, right? Interestingly, it was China Daily that broke the news. In the end, the cycle of boom and bust remains the norm in the movie business. The lackluster reception for recent Hollywood films might only be a phase. And it is also hard to gauge the actual Chinese audience reaction to Hollywood films these days, given the increasingly restricted access. Let's go to the final slide. So my book nevertheless serves as a swan song of some sort to an era of Hollywood fetish in China and vice versa. The relationship is going through a period of reset. Maybe we call that the midlife crisis. So that's kind of the main takeaway is that the situation continues to be fluid. Hollywood will retain an upper hand globally. China can exercise all the censorship it wants to, but Chinese viewers always find a way to access Hollywood films, which of course comes at the expense of Hollywood studios. And piracy will continue to be rampant. And piracy was what Jack Valentine, the long reigning president of the MPAA, the Motion Picture Association of America, and he reigned from 1966 all the way to 2004. So he set it out to curb decades ago the piracy issue as he pushed for China to open its market. So piracy crackdown and market expansion in China were Valentine's twin missions in the 1990s, and he passed away in 2007. And piracy and market access have returned to be the elephant in the room. How to crack down now if the US side does not have the cooperation of the Chinese regulators. History goes cyclical and tend to repeat itself. And so the book is, of course, it covers a lot, much wider terrain, is a lot more sprawling, and it's very hard to condense to this kind of 25 minutes or so snapshot. I think I should stop now so that Ed might have comments and questions, and then we can open it to the floor. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Ying. We have several questions. Let me maybe just start with some broader questions just to frame it, and then I'll choose some of these to pose to you. The first, and you talk about this a bit, and you write about this in the book. Our former dean and colleague Joe Nye wrote a lot about this idea of soft power, influence through means other than military. And do you feel that, largely cultural, do you feel that the film industry is in many ways a proxy for understanding soft power? And if so, what do you think? How do you think about the ways in which China's soft power remains so limited? Obviously outside its own borders, because that one slide, for example, around the two very similar films and their gross revenue is one clear example of that, but of course many other. And so I just was interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that, as Joseph Nye talked about in his book, which, by the way, and he did the foreword for our book, Chinese Soft Power, the book that I co-edited. But yeah, he definitely sees Hollywood entertainment products, including Hollywood films, as a very kind of effective soft power tool, right? So we're talking about soft power, which just means cultural influence, right? It's different from the hard power, right? It's something that's kind of, you pedal softly. It's not a weapon, but it's cultural products. So the other side of the question, so yes, the answer to the first part of the question is affirmative. And these products does have, particularly Hollywood films, right? It was particularly influential, and it can be credited for really promoting a US pop culture, lifestyle, and consumer products during the war and post-war era too. So the second part of the question, so in theory, yes, it should apply to, beyond Hollywood, right? So in the context of China, as the charts suggested, no, it's not really doing much of soft power for Chinese government. I think, I wrote that in the book. I used the term, the artless disappearance, right? So I think the censorship really plays a big role here in actually curbing the potential of these grassroots cultural products from being able to make an influence. And so, look at the K-pop, look at some of other Chinese cultural products that's not manufactured by the state, right? And so they did fine, thank you, they did fine, right? So I think, policy and regulation restrictions really actually is now really conducive to this notion of soft power in the Chinese context, and particularly when it comes to motion pictures.
Great, no,
especially the state-sponsored films.
Do you think that just as a follow-on, actually, we do have a question coming in around K-pop in Korean model of entertainment industry, which has significant, obviously, soft power in the region and beyond and globally. But when you just speak a little bit about the history, so obviously in 25 minutes you can't do this, but just in maybe you can, I can insert it through a question, because you do spend time, and what's great about the book is you do go through history and the ways in which tension, exactly that tension, not just between the US and China, but tension between industry and government existed. Can you talk just a little bit about how maybe in some ways this isn't that new and these tensions have been there for quite some time, and the ways maybe the past informs the present?
Yeah, this is actually precisely the kind of larger point of this book is, this is really, history is just repeating itself. It's really nothing new. And as I mentioned in my talk as well, so there's a lot of parallels and a lot of historical interaction that also resulted in this kind of a tension, right? And including complaints and censorships, and at times collaborations as well, because Hollywood needs the Chinese market, right? And Hollywood needed collaboration from the local Chinese regulators and film industry practitioners, right? Cinema owners, for instance, right? So a lot of those things that, when the tension flared in 1990s, late 1990s and onward, and a lot of the the same issues, complaints about the problems with the image, the portrayal, the perceived negative portrayal of China and Chinese, right? So these issues were there from the beginning. We're talking about 1930s, 1940s. My book talked about giving some instances of these very interesting cases. And I talked about, for instance, what's the name of that film? Pearl Buck's, the adaptation of Pearl Buck's book. Now I'm drawing blank.
Good Earth.
The Good Earth, right? The Good Earth, right? So all these very intricate back and forth cables, and some of which is actually very amusing, right? The complaints, right? And also this impulse from the Chinese side to control what's out there, right? So what image can be distributed, presented, as about China or Chinese, right? So this kind of a compulsion to control, it's there, from day one. A lot of the things that we talked about later on, you can trace back to that era. And of course, we're talking about a different government there.
Great. Let me, so we have a whole bunch of questions, which is great. Some from friends and students, some from new friends. Maybe I'll combine two just to lead on from that discussion on soft power. One is, again, looking to Korea. So is there any sign that China is looking towards the Korean entertainment industry as a model for how to enter the global market more successfully? Similar to that, can we expect that the penetration of Chinese movies will be becoming more visible potentially in regions like South Asia, Africa? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I talked about Global South and also the One Belt Road corridor, right? China has a big presence. And I was in Rwanda, I think 2 years ago, and I'm not talking about Chinese film. I'm just talking about the market is I see a lot of Chinese TV dramas. Right? These are soap operas, right? They're enormously popular. So much so now we have this notion, C-drama, right? Presents Chinese drama, and we have K-drama, K-pop, and now we have C-pop. China has a increasingly kind of visible presence in those markets. What was the other side of the question? I'm sorry, is it?
Just so, yeah, do we, I mean, it's basically asking, you know, is there direct kind of copying of K-pop in that model? Is there some learning there? And the other is just, should we expect to see Chinese entertainment industry growing in places, one belt, one road type of countries, which is something our student Paul Sadil also asked. So do we expect that to work, or other overseas markets like, you know, in Europe, India, Iran, Middle East, Africa?
No, it actually not just, yeah, I sort of answered the question. Yeah, so we do see an increasingly visible presence of these Chinese entertainment products. So, and not just the film, because film is, you know, it takes time to produce, it's difficult, right? And then going back and forth, distribution, time, and so on and so forth. But so, you know, the internet, online gaming, the short videos, you know, that is a very kind of, you know, rapidly developing field. Think about TikTok, right? It's originated in China, right? So these, you know, these are really proliferating. And so that actually can be the potential for, you know, the so-called kind of China influence that's generating. Film is different because it's highly controlled by the government. And it entails a huge budget, right? A lot of manpower, so it's different. So these short format video, even TV dramas, right? So now you see, although Chinese market continues to be kind of really officially close to Netflix, you know, and so on and so forth, but still you do see Netflix, you see the Chinese shows on Netflix. Of course, it's not Squid Game. It's not as popular as the Korean dramas. And so I think a part of the question is, can you emulate how a K-pop model? Is that right?
Yeah, right. Is there learning there? Yeah.
You know, again, it's under this kind of highly controlled environment, it's very difficult.
Right. Yeah.
Because the filmmakers, you know, they feel constrained, right? And they also, there's a fair amount of, we don't know where the red line is. So everybody predicts where the, you know, kind of speculate where the red line is. So there's a fair amount of overly cautious self-censorship. And you know, for these popular entertainment products, it has to be spontaneous. And you know, this is part of the US culture, right? And film industry is different. It's a dinosaur, really.
And our colleague, just on that point of you know, to what's you're mentioning a bit the ways in which Chinese content is entering the US, right, through Netflix, and maybe it's not Squid Game, not that popular, but it is there. Our colleague and friend Joan Kaufman says hello, and she's saying, how about the other side? Meaning, in the end of the day, digital, I mean, DVDs were one way in which a lot of this foreign content entered China illegally through the piracy you talked about before. But now with streaming, do Chinese audiences really, can't they stream a lot of Hollywood movies via VPNs and other types of ways of getting around the Great Firewall? And so is there as much decoupling as we think, or in fact, actually there is quite a lot of foreign content running around China?
Absolutely. Hi, Joan, and I can't see you, but so absolutely, I think that's what I talked about the very last episode. So Jack Valentine, he's the one who started the whole thing, right? He's the one who really chaperoned in the last couple of decades for the expansion of Hollywood, you know, the American entertainment market, China. And so piracy is the key thing. So speaking of whether the Chinese have access to these online streaming programs, you bet. And so let me give you an example. So, because I was in Hong Kong and I really wanted to watch No Man Land, you know, the Oscar-winning film, because but the theater wasn't showing here. And I asked a friend in China, I said, could you give me, would I be able to see it? And so I was able to see it from a streaming site in China. So the film was not distributed officially in China. So that gets to this kind of rampant, you know, people, yeah, absolutely. People have different ways of accessing these streaming contents, right? And because of that, studios is losing a lot of revenue stream, right? So that's another, you know, we're back into square one basically. But in terms of exposure, yes, absolutely. The Chinese can, like I said, the Chinese can watch whatever it is that they actually want to watch. If they actually want to watch, they can find a way to get around the censorship. Yeah.
Liu Chung is asking, is Hollywood still off limits for Chinese capital? Is Chinese investment still coming into Hollywood?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I mean, so the Chinese. Well, I think that you should have to be very careful though, because of the crackdown, right? So the Chinese government is very mindful of, they don't want to have a mass exodus of the money going out. So but money always finds its way out, and money wants to go where you can make profit. So yes, yeah, you bet. And can I tell you who is doing what? No, I can't tell you that, but I can assure you deals are made under the table, not, and nobody's having this grand opening, much like what Dali and Wanda did. Nobody's doing those kind of a high sounding, high gesture opening anymore. But yes.
Paul is correcting me, which so I appreciate, Paul. I think I was reading too quickly. His question is a little different, actually. It was back to this competitive issue. Is in the end of the day, if there are, so Joan's point is clearly there's still a lot of foreign content in China through VPN and other ways. But if there's less, if there's fewer, right? There's a fewer products fundamentally in China from the outside, given some limited success around censorship and blocks. Does that mean that there is a bit of a void? And does that mean that in terms of the Chinese market, there is an opportunity? Are we seeing that filling of the void by non-American movies, so Europe, India, et cetera? I mean, do we see any of that diversification happening, given the fact that maybe there's fewer, or much harder at least, to access American products?
Yeah, in the past, several years, I think it actually began before the COVID hit the market, and the Chinese market and regulators and some of the major import companies, they are consciously cultivating or try to diversify the market, and they're really courting the European studios and try to bring in different kind of products. But does that mean, so I asked the question, so can Hollywood walk away from China? So the question is, can China survive? Can Chinese film market survive with Hollywood? So, and I think, no, because, and when you look at, I have to do a real kind of market analysis for what happened the last 6 months. But my impression, kind of just real raw impression, is yes, you have a few domestic blockbusters who is doing well, but the market slacks off, and the market, the box office potential is artificially suppressed because just because of the lack of Hollywood pictures. Market actually has a much bigger appetite. They can absorb a lot more, but there aren't enough products there. So yes, you can have a few independent European films there, but they're never, they don't ever really open this wide. So only Hollywood films can open wide. Imagine if Top Gun was in China, right? Just imagine that. And for that matter, actually, Jurassic Park opened in China, and it was, I think, ranked number 2 in the box office, only below the Chinese domestic blockbuster moment. So the Hollywood continues to have a lag if the market's allowed to kind of flow freely.
Another interesting point raised by Anthony, Return to Dust, that current movie that focuses on rural hardship and poverty, was pulled due to seemingly Chinese censorship. So do you think, is that about its portrayal of poverty and potentially the conflict that had with clearly Xi Jinping's promulgation effectively of various policies that were designed to eradicate poverty, and then a lot of public proclamations that it had been solved in terms of absolute poverty? Do you think that that's another example of where cultural products tend to run directly against narratives that the party would like?
I don't know the details. I've yet to do, real research about what happened to this film. There's just a lot of chatters about it. I really don't know, so I can't really answer specifically to this, this particular case. But overall, so there is a kind of disconnect between the kind of main narrative the state wants to promulgate, but what the grassroots are allowed to do. Yeah.
A couple other interesting points. One is just around models, right? We talked a little about K-pop in Korea. Paul Francois wrote that Hong Kong was once a powerhouse, of course. Films became massively popular in the West as well. Is there any sign that there's some learning there around the Hong Kong model? Of course, there's a much larger issue around the Hong Kong model politically, clearly, and that has gone the opposite direction. But that's a question by Paul Francois.
So in terms of Hong Kong, just be very clear. So Hong Kong's market has gone long gone, and so there's been a mass exodus of filmmakers. They all moved to the north. So what I kind of jokingly called is northern expedition. So because the market's there, the investment is there. So a lot of the filmmakers, major key filmmakers, have migrated to the north. They set up shops there, and they produce films mainly for the mainland market because the market's just huge. So huge, and Hong Kong is just constitutes such a small market, right? And so the other things, so whether Hong Kong, Hong Kong used to have just such a vibrant film industry, this little cottage industry, and Hong Kong was the crown jewel back then. So if you think Korean films is very vibrant, Korean entertainment products so well known in the U.S. Once upon a time, it was Hong Kong film industry in the 1980s, and Hollywood. Korean film industry actually pretty much emulated the kind of Hollywood, the Hong Kong style filmmaking. But unfortunately, I'm in Hong Kong, but the market's not in Hong Kong. The kind of blockbuster activities are all north of the border. Incidentally, and I'm teaching a Chinese cinema course that actually, I teach, I kind of selectively a few filmmakers that I fancy, and I just poses popular filmmakers from Hong Kong and mainland China and Taiwan, right? So it's kind of it's an interesting comparison. Of course, Taiwan, nobody asked about Taiwan. Taiwan is a completely different model. Taiwan is more of kind of European model. It's the government funds the production. It's kind of a more artisanal model.
Couple of minutes left. Two questions, also interesting. One from Xiaoyang. Do you think that the influence, the economic impact of the shutdown both of theaters, both in the U.S. and China, is that going to change industry? Is that something that is a flash in the pan and was just a multi-year lockdown and shutdown that is going to really not fundamentally change anything? Or is it changing in terms of the way people access these products much more digitally, much more at home, much more mobilely, and it's just more of that? It just accelerated that process.
Yeah, well, it certainly has changed the behavior, some of the viewing behaviors, right? All of a sudden people realize, okay, I don't have to go to the theater. I can just, in my fingertips, and I can just watch it online. But for certain real blockbuster films, such as Top Guns, you still wanted to go to theater because it's a huge event, right? And you want to share, you want to have the group of people, you want to have this excitement, right? Opening and so on and so forth. And of course, Hollywood wants to convince you that you still need that. And so I think the COVID lockdown, President Biden has claimed that the COVID is over in the US. So I think the market is coming back. The US film industry is recovering, right? But China is a different story now. Now China is still under very restrictive COVID policy. So that's why earlier I said, yes, 2020, China surpassed the US to be the worst #1 now, but where the Americans are kind of reclaiming the #1 position. And so, I mean, COVID it's one big kind of incident, and the industry will survive. And no matter what, industry has survived, against the television, against early internet, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. It's, of course, it's all speculative.
Mhm. John has, I think, a great question. One of the strengths, there's multiple strengths, of course, in storytelling, right, that the US has. One in particular is the making of films and lots of content TV series for children, right? Disney comes to mind, Sesame Street, these types of things that have gone really, obviously, global. Capturing childhood, he wrote, and childhood tastes, understanding that palette gives Hollywood an edge as people head into early adulthood. What is China doing in cultural production for youth? How important is that market? Is there any thinking there?
Yes, I think the government party is very much thinking about the youth, thinking about how to influence the youth, how to shape the way youth think, react to the world. You bet. So that I talked in my book about the she generation, right? So oh, absolutely, and yeah, there's a lot of educational tool they can tap into, and utilize in entertainment as well to try to shape the dialogue, the narrative, and also shape how you think. Absolutely.
We are at the bottom of the hour. So Ying, thank you very much for taking the time to share those insights from your book. And thank you, of course, for the book itself. We appreciate it. I also want to obviously thank our team, Sarah and Melissa and Mark, for putting this together. And thank all of you for joining, for the great questions and for some of the insights, particularly related to the bigger questions, right? So why this is a proxy in many ways, as it's only one industry, of course, but it's a proxy for much larger questions. So again, thank you very much on behalf of the Ash Center. I thank you all, and we will see you all again.